Why is your pet losing hair, and what can you do about it?
Are you looking to learn more about natural pet health and wellness? You've come to the right place. Click the link to subscribe to Veterinary Secrets.
If your dog or cat has skin disease, I encourage you to sign up for my brand new webinar. We're going to be covering allergies, parasites, mange, recurring ear infections. And I'll be sharing my top natural remedies. It's happening Tuesday, March 19th at 5 p.m. Pacific. You're invited. You can click the link in the box below to sign up. The most common reason I would see dogs and cats in the veterinary clinic, it is due to skin disease. In today's video, I'm going to show you how I would go about looking at a dog or cat with skin disease, in particular areas of hair loss. I'm going to cover the more common causes, then show you some pretty simple, inexpensive, and easy natural home remedies. The first thing you're going to do is thoroughly examine this area of hair loss. Let's say it was the inside of Tula's ear on her ear tip. I'd have a closer look and I'd want to see, is it red or inflamed? Are there sign of little lines around it? Is it crusted in any way? First, what we're doing there is trying to decide, is the skin reaction, is it inflammatory or non-inflammatory? Then I also want to consider the age of your animal, also where the actual hair is being lost at. If you have a young dog, less than a year of age, and we're dealing with an area of hair loss, say it's around the face, below the eye. Perhaps it's over top of the front of the foot, but it's not inflamed at all. It's just normal looking hair loss. The skin looks normal underneath, but why is the hair not there? The number one thing I would think about is a parasite called Demodex or Demodicosis. Turns out you and I, we actually have this little parasite living in our eyebrows, but don't think about that too much. Let's go back to your dog. Generally, Demodex is considered self-limiting in terms of as your dog's immune system gets stronger, it's going to better deal with that little parasite that's growing in the hair follicles. But there's a few things you can do to potentially speed up healing. Number one, and I use this a lot in practice, topical vitamin E. First, it's going to stimulate the immune system, making the immune system more effective. And in particular, it's stimulating the local immune system where this little parasite is growing in the hair follicles. But a much better option, it is using this oil called neem oil coming from the neem tree in Asia. It is documented and got a bunch of different studies showing it to be especially effective against Demodex. But in applying neem oil, you want to dilute it 10:1. So here we have a 1/4 teaspoon of the neem oil. Then I'm going to be using the vitamin E. I'm going to be using 2.5 teaspoons of it. This gives you the 10:1 dilution. I then use a syringe and I'd be applying that twice daily to the area of your dog's affected skin. And just loosely rubbing it. You want to cover that entire area of hair loss. Then about 4 weeks, you should start to see a marked improvement. If you came into the practice with a kitten, there's areas of hair loss along the face, maybe along the lower limbs. It doesn't really look that itchy, and it doesn't seem to be very itchy. One of the very first things I would be thinking about is this fungal parasite, ringworm. The actual name of the parasite, microsporum, it's living within the hair follicles, and that's where we're seeing the hair fall out. It's not inflammatory, and you don't see a little circular ring. Well, number one, you can go to your veterinarian. You can get an antifungal shampoo such as this, Dermazol. You can go to the pharmacy. You could pick up this. The name of the drug, it's Canesten. It's actually called clotrimazole, and it is actually also an antifungal, and it's effective against ringworm. Then lastly, a strict home remedy coming from your kitchen. You can consider apple cider vinegar. It also has some great antifungal properties. Probably the easiest way is applying the topical Canesten twice a day. This simple little cream, easy to apply. Just squirt a small amount out. You want to make sure that you're wearing gloves in the case it's ringworm. Say in your cat who's got an area of hair loss, or your dog in the front of his foot. You're squirting a small amount of that cream out over top of the skin. You're going to use your gloves to spread it evenly over top of that skin. You're going to do that twice a day. Usually that takes about 3 to 4 weeks. You're going to see a marked improvement. If the area of hair loss, it is red, it's inflamed, it's itchy, probably the most common cause in our dogs and our cats, some type of allergic condition. You've got your dog licking her groin here. In all likelihood, you've got a dog who has an underlying allergy, local area of red inflamed skin. No question by far. It's the most common cause of hair loss in our dogs. Our dogs and cats, they can get areas of hair loss, especially around their tail base. You may even be finding some small red bumps all along the base of your dog or your cat's tail. This is known as a condition, Miliary Dermatitis. The most common cause of that is FAD, or flea allergy dermatitis. Your pet's having an allergic reaction to flea bites, that's the flea saliva, and that's triggering this secondary inflammatory response. And the big thing about this, doesn't take very much. You can have an animal that's got a flea allergy dermatitis, 1 or 2 flea bites can trigger it. So you look through them all, you're convinced there's got to be a flea somewhere, but you see multiple little bumps. The biggest thing there is you got to eliminate the fleas, eliminate the source of the irritation that's then causing the hair loss. This includes witch hazel, neem oil, lavender essential oil, and cedarwood oil. I'll put a link in the description box, number 1, the exact components, and number 2, the video where I show you how to make this exactly. And that's a big key principle for all parts of skin disease. You need to control the external parasites, i.e. the fleas, ticks, lice, etc. You need to make sure they're not the source of the irritation that's then causing the hair to fall out. If your dog is intensely itchy, perhaps just after, say, coming back from being in a kennel, to the point where you just fold over their ear tips and they just start to scratch, intense scratching, one of the big rule outs you want to ensure is your dog doesn't have a type of mange bite called sarcoptic mange. Sarcoptes, it's known to cause this intense marked itching. You're going to have generalized areas of itching followed up with hair loss. There isn't really a good and effective alternative treatment for sarcoptic mange. I'd encourage you to just go see your veterinarian, get them to dispense this revolution. A common secondary cause of our pets to have allergies, they can develop skin conditions either in the form of yeast and or bacteria. Skin yeast infections. The allergy sets up the right conditions for the yeast and or the bacteria to grow, and that's leading to areas of hair loss. It's really common. So many of the animals that I saw with underlying allergies, they had secondary yeast and or secondary staph skin infections. Often in those cases, especially our dogs with the yeast infections, you'll see it in between their armpits, in these cracks and crevices. Often you can see this yellowing on the surface of the skin. If it's a bacterial infection, i.e. staph folliculitis, often then you might see these red circular rings even in your dog's groin. I had clients who would see that and they'd be convinced, I think my dog has ringworm. Nope, your dog probably has a secondary staph infection from an underlying allergy. And here's a great natural option to treat this. To start out, we're using green tea. Ta-da! 1/2 a cup. I've let it sit, steep, and cool for about 20 minutes. The green tea, it's anti-inflammatory, and it's also a great antibacterial. It's going to be effective at killing those surface bacteria, i.e. staph infections. Then to that, we're going to add this great antifungal, antibacterial. This is apple cider vinegar. It is awesome. Probably the best natural remedy I know of for trying to help deal with a dog that has a secondary yeast infection. Also can kill most of those surface skin bacteria that are responsible for the hair loss. I'll be adding in 2 tablespoons of the ACV to the 1/2 a cup of green tea. Then just soak some of this stuff up in a piece of gauze, as I've got here, and then just wipe that on to the affected area of hair loss. You want to be doing that twice a day. It takes many of these times, if we're dealing with an underlying bacterial or yeast infection, 2 to 3 weeks. So you're applying this twice daily to that area of affected skin for 14 to 21 days. If your dog or cat had a history of having a vaccine, and they had an area of hair loss up in here between their shoulder blades, a common spot where the rabies vaccine is given, one of the big things I'd wonder about is a post-vaccine alopecia or an injection site reaction. The vaccines seem to be the most common cause. So what's happening is there's an inflammatory reaction from the vaccine. It's damaging the hair follicles, causing that hair to fall out. You got this localized area of hair loss or alopecia. Sometimes there can be some redness around it. Other times it can be black or hyperpigmented. The main thing here is decreasing local inflammation. I would suggest something topically like this topical vitamin E. And as an aside, just avoid these as much as possible. The last thing you want is to have your dog or cat have an injection site reaction from a vaccine that wasn't needed. Your dog or cat, they could come in with areas of symmetric hair loss, meaning they're losing the hair evenly on either side of their body, along their chest, along their abdomen, over top perhaps of their tail base. In those cases, you want to be ruling out the metabolic diseases. It's possible that they have a thyroid disorder, hypothyroidism in our dogs, hyperthyroidism in our cats. They could have a condition called Cushing's disease, where their body is producing too much cortisol. That's produced from a little gland just in front of the kidney. Dogs with Cushing's disease generally have this distended swaying bellies. It's not uncommon to see this symmetric hair loss. There's a new veterinary treatment for Cushing's disease called trilostane. It seems reasonably effective and it's reasonably safe, But a good alternative option has been pretty well studied. I'd encourage you to consider the 95% curcumin. It wasn't uncommon to see animals in practice that had areas of hair loss along either side of their ear tips. It's called Pinnal Alopecia. It's thought that this has a potential autoimmune basis to it, and it's relating to a vasculitis. Just means inflammation of the vessels. The blood supply is not doing what it's supposed to do, and guess what? The hair follicles fall out. Some of the dogs, I tried vitamin E both topically and orally. Some of them did respond. The sleep hormone melatonin, one of its key things that it does is regulate and manage hair growth. And it has a big role in the hair growth cycle. We're looking at doses of 1 milligram per 10 pounds of body weight to a maximum of 6 milligrams per dog. We're doing that at 1 hour before bedtime. Then there's a few less common causes of hair loss in our dogs and cats. I think it's pretty important that we mention though. Called post-clipping alopecia. Say your winter breed, your husky comes in to have a hot spot treated. We shave a big area of the skin, and that hair is not regrowing 6 months later. The clipping on the hair, that's affected the hair follicles. The only treatment we found to be effective at all was melatonin, at doses of 1 milligram per 10 pounds of body weight. Then there's much less common causes of alopecia in our dogs. One is called alopecia X. It seemed primarily attributed to these little Pomeranians. And what we're seeing is this bilateral symmetric hair loss going all along the side of their body. And they believe it's most related to the sex hormones. One of the big key treatments, melatonin. There are even less common conditions, one called pattern baldness. And that can be seen in the Dachshunds. In this condition, these guys can start out by having hair loss on their pin or their ear tips. It can spread along their neck to their ventrum, to the caudal medial part of their thighs, to the point where they can actually lose the bulk of their hair. They're not actually sure of the underlying cause. You go ahead and rule out a whole bunch of other different things. The only real treatment for pattern baldness is this. It's melatonin in much higher doses of 3 to 6 milligrams every 8 to 12 hours for life. There's a condition called follicular dysplasia seen in the Dobermans, the Rotties, etc., which can cause really unusual hair loss. It generally starts within the first 3 years of age, and what you're seeing is almost this moth-eaten areas of hair loss all along the skin, this whole patchy areas of hair loss. It's not itchy, and unfortunately, really difficult to treat. The word dysplasia just means abnormal, and follicular, that's talking about the hair follicles. So that's where you're seeing this all patchy areas of hair loss. Treatment, they're looking at treating secondary skin infections, some of the pyodermas. They're looking at keeping the skin hydrated with these humectants, i.e. things like this. Castor oil, want to keep the moisture into the skin. And then lastly, they're looking at things such as melatonin, eventually help the hair to regrow again. Anytime you have an animal that has an area of hair loss and it looks like they're somewhat irritated or licking, you want to be thinking about like what is underneath that? Is there something that could be triggering my dog or cat to lick that area? I'd often be seeing cats that are excessively licking inside their groin. Turns out these cats often had an inflamed bladder or idiopathic cystitis. So one of the big treatments in that condition was focusing on the urinary tract. I've found many of the cats respond really well to this CBD cannabidiol. Number one, it's a natural anti-inflammatory. It's taking away inflammation in the bladder. And then number two, it also can help decrease anxiety. And we know for many of the animals, there's such a big correlation between anxiety and disease. You take away the anxiety, you deal with the disease. Then other cases or animals can just have a thing where we would call psychogenic alopecia. In terms of they're excessively licking one area of their body. We just don't know why. Many of these animals responded really well to some of the anti-anxiety treatments, including L-theanine, including valerian, and even melatonin. Our supplement, Dr. Jones' Complete Canine Calming Chews, includes some of those ingredients. Good option if you've got an animal that has psychogenic alopecia. Tula doesn't have that, but Tula has a fair degree of anxiety being on the table here. So she's going to finish today's video with a chew. Yum. As you can see, there are multiple different causes of alopecia or hair loss in our dogs and cats. But the big point here is number one, starting out by thoroughly examining the area of hair loss, looking at the age of your animal. It's possible that it's ringworm. It's possible that it's even Demodex. Go through all those different conditions I discussed, and if your dog or cat has one of those conditions, you've yet to try any of the alternative options, then I encourage you to try one of the ones I suggested. Thanks so much for watching this edition of Veterinary Secrets, and if you've yet to subscribe, I encourage you to do so by clicking up there. And lastly, I really encourage you to attend our brand new webinar, Skin Diseases of Dogs and Cats, plus my most important top natural remedies. How to deal with hot spots, allergies, fleas, lice, and ticks. Common veterinary medications to avoid, plus much safer natural options. It's happening Tuesday, March 19th at 5 p.m. Pacific. You can click the link in the box below to sign up.